He used to be called Citizen 625726. He used to call himself Unbroken. When he left his dystopian city behind, he thought he had found paradise. What he found was uglier and darker than anything he could have imagined. This is his story. This is Inferior. Now available at Amazon, Smashwords, and at studiobrainstorm.net. Links in the description. So, after possibly the strongest beginning to a Star Wars comic I've seen thus far, we move on to the next arc in the story, Flashpoint. Technically it's 4 issues, but in reality Flashpoint is 3 issues and an extra bit of backstory. Issues 7, 8, and 10 are the principal story arc of Flashpoint, with Dustin Weaver in the artist's chair, while the art for issue 9, entitled Flashpoint Interlude, was done by Brian Ching. Ching also did the cover art for all 4 issues with some help from colorist Michael Atiyeh. 3 weeks following the escape of our heroes from Taris, the story of Flashpoint begins on the small, fringe mining world of Vanquo. Here on the fringe of Republic territory, our intrepid band of 5, Zane Carrick, former Padawan, Martin Hieroglyph, Snivian Conman, LB Loader Droid, and Jarrell and Camper, former junk dealers, try to scrape by essentially conning the local miners. A combination of Zane using the old Jedi mind trick, some electronic hacking courtesy of Camper, and Jarrell wearing a disguise and wielding Zane's lightsaber, they trick the miners into thinking that a Mandalorian invasion is imminent and thus causing them to flee in haste, leaving behind all their food and electrical parts. Our heroes claim the food so that they won't starve, and the parts to keep LB and their ship, The Last Resort, functional. Griff even manages to snag some mining charges, figuring they might be worth something if he can find the right buyer. Not the most honest way of making a living, but given that they're all fugitives from both the Republic and the Jedi Order, it's not like they have many options. Naturally, this whole con was Griff's idea, and once again Miller gives him some of the better bits of dialogue. "We ran out of anything I can eat days ago. Our Arcanian friends there weren't exactly living like gourmets. Sure, but they were living in a dump when we found them. The dump has produced great gourmets, Zane. Do not disrespect the dump." If Miller keeps up this favoritism, Griff is going to rapidly become my favorite character in this series. For her part, Jarrell has really started to enjoy pretending to be a Jedi. Unfortunately, her timing proves to be very inauspicious. While the others are starting to hump their supplies up into the hills where the Last Resort is waiting, an actual Mandalorian invasion almost literally drops out of the sky onto their heads. Thus begins the Battle of Vanquo. According to Old Republic records, the official beginning of the Mandalorian Wars. The Mandalorians immediately surround and capture Jarrell, clearly mistaking her for being a Jedi. And it's all Zane can do to stop Camper from rushing out of cover in a futile effort to save her. If they want to have any chance of that, they'll need to get back to the ship first and try to follow the Mandalorians. Unfortunately, the Mandalorian war party spots them and gives chase. Once again though, even in the direst of circumstances, KOTOR the comic manages to weave in some low-key humor. And in this case, it doubles his characterization. LB was more than a little traumatized by being thrown off a cliff by Master Lucian back in commencement. Ever since, he's been extremely reluctant to actually do what others tell him to do. And so, with a few exceptions, the others are only able to get him to do anything, usually by persuading him that what they want him to do will somehow cause harm to Master Lucian or to escape from him. LB is by no means the brightest bucket of bolts in the galaxy. Being a loader droid, he was never programmed with much in the way of intelligence. But he's still quite useful in a pinch. For example, throwing one Mandalorian into the others, causing them to go down like 9 pins. all except for their unusually spiky-looking leader. Strangely though, at one point when the leader has Zane dead to rights, he doesn't kill him. He does try to steal the last resort though, but still, it's kind of odd for a Mandalorian to pass up a kill. Our heroes do manage to make it aboard the last resort before he takes off, though at the cost of one of LB's hands. Yeesh, it's just as well the droids can't feel pain. And a combination of Camper using Jerail's shock staff and LB's mechanical strength succeed in subduing the Mandalorian. While Jerail cools her heels in a cell aboard some Mandalorian vessel, Camper is still obsessed with rescuing her and sends the last resort through the epic space battle between Mandalorian and Republic forces in pursuit of her. A brief pause to acknowledge the glorious Basilisk war droid, and we get a pair of cameos that will become relevant later on in the comic. First, Mandalore the Ultimate and his right-hand man Cassus Fett, who reveal that the attack on Vanquo is mostly a diversion so that the main body of the fleet can attack Taris, which is the actual target. The other of Captain Karath of the Republic Navy and his lieutenant Morvis. Karath's purpose here is twofold. The first is to notice the last resort heading for Mandalorian space, and given the official narrative of the Padawan massacre, assumes that Zane Carrick has to be a Mandalorian agent, as if the kid's reputation wasn't already tarnished enough. Trust me, this will come back to bite the kid later. And second, once again through Miller's clever writing, provide exposition that doesn't feel like exposition. And I must quote directly once again because Miller's writing is just that good. Maybe they should have had him write the dialogue for the prequel films, huh? You sound uneasy, Morvis. Don't you know of victory when you see one? You're witnessing the triumph of Republic priorities. Mandalore spends years picking off unaligned rim worlds. The Senate sits. Mandalore gets too close to one full of Republic business interests, and the Senate throws at Republic membership and a security cordon so long it would take 5 fleets our size to crew. I'm sure Mandalore did a little dance when he heard the Republic had pledged to defend Taris. They've called these last few months war. I think you can see it's nothing of the sort. Meanwhile, back aboard the last resort, Zane is trying to extract information from the now captive Mandalorian warrior to no avail, and only when the warrior hears that they're headed for Mandalorian space does he finally agree to explain a few things. Namely, who he is, why he tried to steal their ship in order to escape from the other Mandalorians, and where they're taking Jerail. Firstly, his name is Roland Dyer. As to why he was seemingly trying to escape from his own side, it's because his own side very much wants him dead. Why? Because he was asking questions. Very awkward questions about why exactly the Mandalorians have decided to attack the Republic, and why have they done it in this half-hearted probing way instead of just charging in like tradition demands. When they refused to give him any answers that satisfied him, he decided that he just wouldn't fight. But of course, that's non-negotiable in Mandalorian culture, and so he's been thrown into the front lines of every battle time and again in the hope that he will at least die as a Mandalorian should, taking down enemies. Naturally, he's survived every single time, and every single time he's tried to escape in order to find answers. Until recently, though, all these attempts failed. His own side would catch him and throw him into the meat grinder once again. As it turns out, Roland wasn't really wrong to question what was going on here, although I doubt anybody could have suspected the true depths of what might have been edging Mandalore to declare war on the Republic. As for Jerail, she's being taken, like all Jedi captives, to a place called Flashpoint. Originally a research station of the Republic, it was taken by the Mandalorians early in their raids. Now it serves as a prison camp cum experimentation facility headed by a particularly unsavory character known as Demagal. His particular contribution to the Mandalorian war effort is to study the Jedi captives to find some way of determining the source of their power, and whether or not this could be used for the Mandalorian war effort. And by study, I mean torture and brutal experimentation. So he's basically the Star Wars equivalent of Yosef Mengele. As if that weren't bad enough, Flashpoint is situated on a planet that is so close to its parent sun that the facility and everyone in it has to remain behind a special electromagnetic energy shield. Set foot outside of it, and you will instantly be reduced to a puff of irradiated dust. Naturally, having no dog in this particular fight, Roland is all for turning around and heading out of Mandalorian space. But of course, Camper isn't having any of that, and so our heroes are forced to come up with a cunning plan. While all this is going on, Jor-El does indeed arrive at Flashpoint and is thrown in with the rest of the Jedi captives. Notably, a certain human named Squint, whom Zane met briefly in Issue 0. Unlike the Mandalorians, he knows immediately that Jor-El is no Jedi, and so when Demagol emerges and sets his eye on her, despite the fact that he himself has just come from the good doctor's slab, Squint actually offers himself up again to the doctor's brutal experimentation in order to spare her. Luckily for all involved, except for the Mandalorians, Marn Hieroglyph's scheming brain once again comes through, and our heroes pull off a con not too dissimilar from the ones they pulled on the miners on Vanquo. Roland takes the last resort in, claiming to have captured a new Jedi test subject for Demagol. Naturally, the Mandalorians search the vessel, but with Griff and Camper hiding in one of the secret smuggler compartments, all they find are piles of miscellaneous junk and a down-powered LB. Mandalorian warrior and Padawan make their way to Demagol's lab, where they take the good doctor by surprise, knock him out, and dress Zane in his armor. This actually almost gets him killed, as Jor-El sees him walking out with Roland wearing Demagol's armor and assumes that the sadistic Mandalorian experimenter has killed Zane. The disguised Padawan only gets her to stop by sending her a telepathic message. This actually raises a question. Obviously, non-Force sensitives can't send telepathic messages, but can they receive them from a Jedi? I don't recall seeing that anywhere. Maybe someone can clarify it in the comments section. Anyway, Roland and Demagol go outside to talk to the sentries, and while Roland regales them with tales about how he caught the Jedi he just brought in, Griff and Camper, having abandoned the smuggler's compartment, lower out of the ship the sack of mining charges Griff stole on Vanquo. Under cover of Roland's distraction, Zane uses the Force to attach those mining charges to various parts of the facility, including the towers that maintain the electromagnetic shield. Griff, pretending to be a Republic admiral, contacts Flashpoint and informs the Mandalorians that the facility, as well as the several Republic ships the Mandalorians have recently captured, are all booby-trapped to explode, and proves this by detonating the mining charges, taking out one Republic vessel as well as the shield generator. Flashpoint's day-night cycle is only an hour long in total, and by now the Mandalorians have only minutes until the sun comes back. And now there's no shield to stop them from being roasted inside their own armor. As Griff threatens to blow up the bunker facility as well, Roland encourages the other Mandalorians to flee on their own vessels, abandoning the facility and the Republic ships. Zane, as Demagol, pretends to flee into the facility to try and save his research while Roland goes after him. With everybody safe inside the bunker or aboard the Last Resort, our heroes sit back and watch as the Mandalorians abandon Flashpoint.
I love it when a plan comes together.
Griff, Camper, and LB then wait until night comes around again to bring out the extra spacesuits from the Last Resort so that the Jedi prisoners can now board the Republic ship and return to Republic space. Roland brings out a still groggy Demagol and is eventually persuaded to accompany the Jedi back to Coruscant in the hopes that it may help him find answers to his questions regarding the Mandalorian war effort. Roland seemingly agrees to this, but then at the very end, he sneaks out of the Jedi ship and aboard the Last Resort, even hiding in the compartment he was imprisoned in before takeoff. Another mystery to be answered later. Before this happens, though, the Jedi prisoners, who had been incarcerated for months now, learn that the war has actually truly begun. Squint, or Alec as he prefers to be known, offers Zane a place in their ranks, as they are among those Jedi volunteers willing to help the Republic in defiance of the Council's insistence on neutrality. Zane, still under a death mark for murder, can only refuse. He does ask Alec that when he returns to Republic space and hears of the official narrative of the Padawan massacre, remember only what Zane did here. An understandably confused Alec can only agree, and so the two ships depart, heading for Republic space, but in different directions. But not before Alec thanks the crew of the Last Resort for lending him one of their spacesuits, a certain distinctive red spacesuit. Nice touch, Miller. While Commencement remains the strongest part of the series thus far, it is a mistake, albeit an understandable one, to assume that Flashpoint on first viewing is just filler, as it really doesn't seem to advance the story of Zane trying to clear his name and/or get revenge on the masters who framed him for their murder. The purpose of Flashpoint, though, is to set up certain plot threads that become relevant later on in the series. We just don't know what they are yet. As for the art, Dustin Weaver is consistent and excellent, but I just can't help but prefer Brian Ching's more distinctive sketchbook style. But before we can leave Flashpoint behind us, we must discuss the intermediate standalone chapter known as Flashpoint Interlude: Homecoming. Here, Brian Ching resumes the artist chair from Dustin Weaver. Flashpoint Interlude is possibly the best part of this arc, as it provides some very much needed explanation on the backstory of the 5 members of the Covenant, specifically Lucian Dre. And let me tell you, it really goes a long way to explaining the kind of person he is and how he turned out to be this way. Like a lot of origin story comics, Flashpoint Interlude weaves in current events with flashbacks to the past. It's well done and well presented, but for the sake of summarization, I'm going to keep these two separate from one another and start with the backstory. Lucian Dre was born the son of Barrison Dre, scion of a wealthy family turned Jedi Knight, and his wife Krinda. In fact, according to Wikipedia, Lucian was conceived right around the time of the Beast Wars on Onderon, the events that mark the beginning of Tales of the Jedi. In terms of Force talent, Lucian's parents could not have been more different. Barrison was the epitome of a Jedi Guardian, skilled in the martial aspects of the Force, while Krinda had been a consular, and especially a skilled Jedi seer, possibly the best of her generation. This was in part down to the fact that she was half human and half Miraluka. While there are plenty of Force-sensitive individuals in Star Wars, the Miraluka are a rare example of a Force-sensitive species, a near-human race that lacks physical eyes and relies entirely on their connection to the Force to see. Unfortunately, Krinda, like everyone else, completely failed to foresee the fall of Ulic Qel-Droma and Exar Kun to the dark side, which inevitably led to the Sith War, which resulted in countless Jedi deaths, including Master Vodo Siosk Boss, who had been her tutor at one point, her sister, who is never named or shown, and her husband Barrison. Blaming herself for her inability to foresee the tragedy and possibly prevent the deaths of those she loved, Krinda Dre wallowed in self-pity and grief, secluding herself on the Dre family estate and effectively shutting out the outside world. At this point, I think you can all clearly see the mommy issues coming over the horizon. From an early age, Lucian had exhibited strong Force sensitivity, but once it became very clear that his abilities favored his father's and that he completely lacked any kind of Jedi prescience, Krinda essentially neglected him, leaving her son's day-to-day care to the family droids and his Jedi training to her manservant Hazen, a former Padawan who never made full knighthood. At this point, Krinda wanted nothing more to do with the Jedi Order, but the Order kept coming to her. The Sith War had claimed the lives of many senior members of the Jedi Order. Some had failed to escape from Ossus in time before it was destroyed. Others had been killed by their own students who had been corrupted by Exar Kun. Krinda, again one of the most talented seers of her generation, was one of the few deemed sufficiently qualified to train others in the ways of the Force. But she would have none of it. Until a child was brought to her who was incredibly talented in Jedi foresight. And so a young Lucian watched as a Miraluka child named Canilia was introduced to his mother. Krinda set to the training with a will now, because she had discovered a new purpose for herself. She had failed to anticipate the Sith War, but perhaps with the right training, the most talented seers of the Jedi Order in the future could anticipate a similar tragedy and prevent it from happening. This led to her creating in secret the Covenant, whose sole purpose was to anticipate another resurgence of the Sith and then do everything necessary to stop it from happening. And so, over the decades, Krinda amassed a significant number of students, who she trained in the ways of the Force, especially the ways of Jedi prescience, and secretly inducted into the Covenant behind the backs of the Jedi Council. Of all of her students, the most talented were 4. Cornelia, as we mentioned earlier, a Togruta named Rana Te, a Kill named Zaymar, apologies for mispronouncing his name before, and Feln, a Fioran. Unfortunately, Krinda's new drive did not help relations between her and her son. No matter how good Lucian became as a lightsaber duelist, it didn't matter to Krinda because he could not see the future. And the young boy could only watch resentfully as she doted upon her students and completely ignored him. This was especially unfortunate as Lucian turned out to be an exceptionally skilled warrior, able to beat all 4 of the consulars in single combat, even when it was 4-on-1. And yet all his mother cared about was that he might have badly injured her precious seers. No matter what Lucian did, he could never obtain his mother's approval. It was then that Hazen intervened, suggesting that there might yet be a place for Lucian in Krinda's plan for the Covenant. If Cornelia, Zaymar, Rana Te, and Feln were the eyes peering into the future, Lucian could serve as the hand, the one that would take their sight and make it into action. With his superior combat skill, Lucian could also act as their protector. What's more, Lucian could act as the intermediary, dealing with issues concerning the Order at large and the Republic, allowing the other 4 to focus on looking into the future. And thus, the first of the many cells of the Covenant was created, the first Watch Circle. That's the backstory part anyway. In the present day, Lucian and his 4 accomplices have returned to Coruscant. Initially, they try to see Krinda at the Dre estate, but are informed that they will have to wait for a communique first. Then, they have to go to their meeting with the High Council and explain themselves. They run into a certain video game protagonist, technically 2 if what some say is true and this one here is supposed to be the exile, and find that the Council is not pleased with them. 4 Padawans dead, their ostensible murderer escaped twice from Jedi custody, resulting in a crisis of faith in the Jedi Order, leading to disturbances on Taris that are leaving it wide open to Mandalorian invasion. Granted, apart from the radical faction known as the Revankists, the Jedi Order have no interest in getting involved in the Mandalorian War. Naturally, Lucian takes to the fore as spokesman for the Watch Circle, and don't you just love his little wordplay here? Masters of the Council, I did it. I'm guilty. I killed the Padawans of Taris, or I might as well have. The dark side touched my Padawan and I failed to act. Of this I stand convicted. Anyway, Lucian is in agreement with the Council that the Mandalorian Wars are not a Jedi concern, and, as penance for failing to prevent the Padawan massacre, asks the Council that they be given leave to hunt down Zane Carrick, before he becomes even more of a danger to others. The Masters of the Council are not impressed. They instead decide to have a general alert for Zane sent out to all Jedi postings across the Republic, and decide that the 5 should be separated and given different postings. I don't know why, but for some reason I do like this quote one of the council members gives when Rana Te tries to protest the separation. If we're going to have a Jedi Council at all, then somebody somewhere is going to do what it tells them. Naturally, the members of the Watch Circle are not particularly happy with this development, as well as the continued evidence of the Jedi leadership's unwillingness to take seriously either the threat of the Sith or the Mandalorians, even if they themselves agree that the Mandalorians are by far the lesser threat. Rana Te puts it well. A Sith Lord could walk right in front of the Council and they'd lecture him about neutrality. As it stands, they have little choice but to do as the Council demands, even if they have no intention of giving up the hunt for Zane. At last, Lucian receives the long-expected communique and heads over to his former home. Krinda is seemingly unavailable, but Lucian does meet with Hazen, and we learn some pretty interesting things. Remember how after the vision on the rogue moon, the others had been ready to kill the Padawans then and there, but Zaymar had insisted that they at least contact their leaders on Coruscant first? Apparently, Lucien did send a report to Coruscant, and Krinda and Hazen had made it clear that they were to bring the Padawans to Coruscant alive for their own assessment. Instead, Lucien had ignored the instructions, decided to unilaterally carry out the Padawan massacre, and then, quite clearly, lied to the other 4 that they'd gotten the approval from Coruscant. Lucien is unrepentant, insisting that he did exactly as his role of Hand of the Watch Circle demanded: interpret the situation on the ground and act. Hazen counters with the obvious. The whole Padawan massacre debacle has nearly exposed the Covenant, and now, thanks to the Jedi Council, all 5 members will be separated from one another, making them less effective. Hazen then mentions something interesting, something about Zane having a special connection to the Force, but that Lucien never bothered to report it to them. Lucien doesn't think it's important or of any use, but Hazen wonders if maybe that's simply because he didn't know what to do with it, an indictment of Lucien's ability as a teacher. He then reiterates the command that Zane Carrick, as the last of the Padawans left alive, is to be brought to Coruscant, to him and Krinda, alive. Lucien refuses, firmly convinced that Zane is the herald of the Sith's return and that leaving him alive is too great of a risk. In response, an angry Hazen reveals some pretty grisly prosthetics and reminds Lucien that, as a veteran of the Sith War, he knows far more about risk than Lucien ever could. Lucien leaves the Dre estate, convinced that Hazen is hiding something, but decides ultimately that that's fine. After all, he's got his own secret too. Well, so far we've got a few new mysteries to ponder, but at least we've also started to get some answers, namely as to how the Covenant came to be and why Lucien and the other Jedi Masters have done what they've done. Things just keep getting more interesting by the minute. That said, we've still got a ways to go. Next up, a short 2-issue affair known as Reunion. Until then.